All right. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Absolutely. Always ready to dig into some interesting stuff.
Well, today we're tackling something pretty huge, literally. Nigeria's proposed budget for 2025.
Oh, yeah, that's a big word.
We're talking a whopping 47.9 trillion. That's trillion with a T.
No small potato.
Not at all. So today we're going to break down this massive financial plan. What does it mean for Nigeria? What could it mean for you? Let's get into it.
You know, what's fascinating about this is it's not just about 1 year, right?
Oh, right. Go on.
It's all part of Nigeria's medium-term expenditures framework. Think of it like a 3-year roadmap for the economy. And it has to play nice with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which sets the rules for managing the country's money.
Okay, so big picture stuff, setting a course for the years ahead. But let's zoom in a bit. Who's the architect behind this proposal?
So this proposal comes straight from the Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Atiku Bagudu. He presented it to President Bola Tinubu's Federal Executive Council.
And the timing of this is pretty key, right?
Absolutely. Gives the National Assembly a good chunk of time to review it, maybe make some tweaks before the fiscal year actually kicks off.
Makes sense. Now, we've got to talk about that eye-popping number,
Mm.
47.9 trillion. But to make ends meet, the minister also mentioned needing 9.2 trillion in new borrowing. Is that normal?
It's a good question. Every country borrows money, you know. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And when you compare Nigeria's debt to its GDP, it's actually not that alarming compared to global averages. The key thing to remember is that debt itself isn't the problem.
I see. So it's more about what you do with that borrowed money.
Exactly. If they invest it wisely in things like infrastructure, education, healthcare areas that'll boost the economy down the line, it can be a really smart move.
Like planting seeds for future growth.
Exactly. But if it's not used effectively, well, yeah, then it becomes a problem. It can actually drag the economy down.
So strategic spending is what we're looking for.
Absolutely.
And speaking of strategy, Bragudu really emphasized the importance of continuing to deregulate petroleum prices and the exchange rate. Why are those policies so crucial to this whole budget plan?
Well, they're basically banking on those market reforms to attract more foreign investment, get the economy humming, and ultimately bring in more tax revenue.
Sounds a bit like a gamble, though.
Kind of, yeah. It's a calculated risk. If those reforms don't attract the investment they're hoping for, well, things could get tricky.
High stakes. Now, I also heard some talk about the NNPC, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, needing to tighten its belt a bit. Some are even saying the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021 might need amending. What's going on there?
Right, so the NNPC is the big player in Nigeria's oil industry, and they're under a lot of pressure to generate revenue for this budget to work, but at the same time, there's this push for them to become more efficient, cut down their production costs.
So can they pull it off? Can they make money, A&D keep costs down?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a tough balancing act for sure.
Lots of balls in the air with this one. And then we have those other bills in the mix, the economic stabilization and tax reform bills. What are the chances those actually make it through, and how would they impact the budget if they did?
Yeah, that's where the political climate really comes into play. If those bills pass, it could give the government more tools to manage the economy, potentially boost tax revenue, which would make this budget a whole lot more, well, solid. But if they get stalled in the legislative process, it throws a wrench in the whole plan, creates a ton of uncertainty.
So lots of ifs and maybes hanging over all of this. But let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. What does all of this mean for everyday Nigerians? Where might we see more spending? Where might things get a little tighter?
It's what everyone wants to know, right? The nitty-gritty details of the budget haven't been released yet.
Okay.
But based on past trends and what the government's been saying, we can expect a big focus on infrastructure, education, and healthcare.
Investing in the future.
Exactly. But to make all the numbers add up, there will probably have to be some cuts somewhere. Maybe less essential areas or subsidies. Once the detailed budget is out, we'll see exactly where those cuts land and what it means for people's wallets.
first briefed Council on his recent trip to Saudi Arabia for the Arab Africa Summit, and also he briefed Council on the side meetings he had with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Mr. President also congratulated the 7 newly appointed members of the cabinet that had just concluded their retreat. There were a number of issues discussed at Council, and I have with me here first the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edu, on my immediate right. To the extreme right is the Special Advisor to the President on Public Communication and National Orientation, Mr. Sunday Dare. I have on my left the Honorable Minister of Budget and National Planning, Senator Abubakar Bagudu, and the newly minted Honorable Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Reduction. A number of issues were discussed that will be, of course, of interest to Nigerians. Let me bring in the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Coordinating Minister of the Economy.
Thank you. Information and National Orientation. Honorable Minister for Budget and Economic Planning, Honorable Minister for Housing, and the Humanitarian. Honorable Minister for Humanitarian Affairs. Today we did have, as we've just heard, the Federal Executive Council meeting, and I had the honor and privilege to present 2 memoranda to the Federal Executive Council. And the first one was to complete the borrowing program of the federal government in terms of the external borrowing, with the approval of a US dollars 2.2 billion financing program made up of access to the international capital market for some combination of a Euro bond offer and a Sukuk bond offer. Perhaps a Euro bond of about $1.7 billion and Sukuk financing of another $500 million. The actual makeup of the financing, which will be done as soon as the National Assembly has considered and seen fit to hopefully approve of the borrowing plan, and the external borrowing approval is given, it will be done this year as soon as possible after approval. And the actual combination of instruments that will be raised will depend on what the advisors, the transaction advisors, the financial advisors, what they say about market conditions at the time at which we decide we want to enter the market. Of course, earlier in the year, we had shown the resilience of the Nigerian financial markets and their depth, their capacity, their increased complexity and sophistication by having a domestic issuance of dollar bonds which attracted Nigerians investors from far and wide, as well as others. And the important point about it is that it used the Nigerian financial system, the Nigerian regulatory system, and Nigerian financial expertise and structures. And it was, apart from any other thing, it was a vote of confidence in the economic reform program of Mr. President, His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Likewise, this being able to access the international capital market is also a sign of the acceptance and the support for the macroeconomic program of Mr. President and indeed his entire administration. As we know, that economic program, that economic recovery and revival program to turn around the economy is focused on macroeconomic, the macroeconomic pillars of market pricing of PMS and market pricing of foreign exchange. Those key pricings and those key situations have been achieved, particularly as of October 2, when we had once again in Nigeria local refining of petroleum products. That paved the way for the completion of the what was started in May 29, 2023, which was to correct the macroeconomic imbalances that were in the economy. So it is on the basis and the strength of the progress to date that we do have a window to access the international capital market for up to $2.2 billion in financing that is part of the Nigerian 2024 Appropriation Act as amended. Thank you. Ministry of Finance Incorporated Real Estate Investment Fund is going to, in the first instance, target 250 billion naira of funding for provision of low-cost, long-term mortgages. When I say low-cost, we are talking about low double-digit, maybe 11, 12%, maybe even less, depending on market conditions. And that will be achieved by attracting long-term savers, life insurance companies, maybe pension funds within the limits of what is allowed, and other savers who want to save long-term, getting market rates. Their money will be blended with low-cost funding that the government has access to, funds that are available to the government at 1%, funds that are available for 40 years. And by blending the two, the seed funding by government on the one hand, and the funds that investors bring under a prospectus which the SEC has approved and which will now be made available to the public, that blending of funds, depending on what percentage of 1% money you merge with what percent with market-based interest rates, you will end up with affordable pricing on the mortgages. And as I've said, the tenor can be the likes of 20 years and more. And what that does is, as I said, it opens up the whole mortgage sector. It relieves Nigerians who normally will be faced with almost 30% interest rates, and they will be faced with tenors of 2, 3, 4 years within which they have to pay back. Now they will have rates closer to 10%. Now they will have tenors over 20 years. And that will be a tremendous relief, and it's a promise kept by His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And as I've said earlier, the multiplier effects for the economy as a whole to drive economic growth and job creation are obvious to all. So that was the second approval that was received by the Ministry of Finance today. Thank you.
Minister will give us details of that.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, the Honorable Minister for Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Reduction, as well as the Presidential Advisor, Sunday Dari, and Minister of State for Finance. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Today, the Federal Executive Council approved a memorandum by the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, which was presented by the Director General of the Budget Office on the medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper for 2025 to 2027. And the Memo 6 Council's approval for the medium-term expenditure framework for submission to the National Assembly. And the Federal Executive Council graciously, upon listening to the Director General, Tanimi Yakubu, approved the 2025-2027 medium-term expenditure framework, which, as required by the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007, the medium-term expenditure framework started with a macroeconomic background, which acknowledged that despite challenging conditions in the global economy, Nigeria's economy has turned in the right direction, achieving a positive growth rate in 2 quarters continuously, significantly, with the growth rate of 3.19% in real terms in the second quarter of 2024. However, it acknowledged that the government will continue to tackle inflation, strengthen economic resilience, support the vulnerable, and rebuild fiscal buffers. And support to higher employment generation sectors, improve the business environment, and effective implementation of youth development and social investment programs. It also included a review of the 2024 budget implementation, where it acknowledged that a review of the implementation of the federal government 2024 budget reveals promising progress in revenue collection and expenditure management. Despite lags in prorated targets, the overall trajectory shows that fiscal efforts are on track, with key non-oil streams performing better than anticipated. Equally, it included parameters for the 2025-2027 medium-term fiscal framework, which include an oil price benchmark of $75 a barrel for 2025, oil production of 2.06 million barrels a day, as well as an exchange rate of 1,400 naira to a dollar, and GDP growth of 4.6%. It is expected that for 2025, the federal government's budget estimate is the aggregate expenditure is estimated at 47 trillion, and This includes a borrowing of 13.8 trillion, which is 3.87% of the estimated GDP. And it includes projections, especially for the first time, provisions for contribution to the development commissions that have been passed by the National Assembly or are in the process of being passed by the National Assembly. And equally, the fiscal objectives were conservative because we want to ensure that we steady the course much as we believe the projections will be exceeded. The budget size that was approved for presentation to the National Assembly in the MTEP is 47.9 trillion, with new borrowings of 9.22 trillion to finance the budget deficit in 2025, as well as noting that we need to sustain the market deregulation, commendable market deregulation of petroleum prices and exchange rate, and to compel the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited to lower its oil and gas production cost significantly, and even to consider the need to amend the relevant sections of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021 to address the significant risk to federation revenue. The Federal Executive Council approved the medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal strategy paper, and it will be submitted to the National Assembly. This in addition to bills that are already at the National Assembly, the economic stabilization bills and tax reform bills, which we believe we will have a very, very strong growth in 2025. Thank you.
All right, so let's recap. We've got a massive budget, ambitious plans for economic reforms, and this tricky balancing act of borrowing money while trying to boost revenue. So here's the question for everyone listening. If this budget gets the green light, what impact could it have on your life?
Yeah, think about it.
Your job, your industry, your cost of living, the opportunities available to you in Nigeria. Because these numbers, they translate into real-life changes for people.
Absolutely. This is about your future.
So take some time to really think about how this could all play out, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.